This is Boomer Life on CISL 650.
And welcome back to Boomer Life here on CISL 650 as the OJs carry on for love of money. We're talking about money and some of the problems that money presents to us. And sometimes it gives us more than a few problems, so we get into some serious debt matters. And here to help us, well, resolve some of those, or at least find out how to resolve those, is George Abakhan, the president of Abakhan and Associates, trustees in bankruptcy, with 5 offices across British Columbia and a will to jump in the car and travel to see clients. That's kind of different, the way you do business, you at Abakhan, you and your colleagues, George. If somebody in the Kootenays, where you don't have an office, is in deep trouble and needs to see a trustee, well, then you'll send one of your guys down there and meet that person, and that's the way you do business.
Exactly. We will generally do business in an executive office at a local, say in Cranbrook or Castlegar or somewhere like that, generally as a referral from a credit counselor in many cases.
Right.
And we have no objection to traveling. This weekend I'll probably be visiting somebody at their home up on the Sunshine Coast. So all of us travel either on the island, up north, around the Prince George area, Kootenays, Kelowna, have ticket, will travel.
Well, that's right. And you know, what a great idea. With that mobility factor in the business model for Abakhan and Associates, I'm sure has proven to be quite smart over the years as you make yourself available to individuals who otherwise would have a heck of a time trying to find you at one of your offices. And that's a two-way street, isn't it?
That's right. We're happy to travel. We get a lot of satisfaction from making settlements for the debtors. We try to represent both sides, the debtors and the companies. We know what the creditors want, and as such, we know what they'll settle for.
Right. Once
they're faced with a situation of either going bankrupt or accepting a settlement. And we know, for instance, some banks will invariably not want any settlement less than 35 cents or 30 cents. Others will accept 25 cents and others will accept 20. So depending on the mix of creditors, we can generally work out a plan that is satisfactory to the creditors and satisfactory to the debtor.
I wonder, George, what percentage of people come to see you at Abakhan and Associates, you and your colleagues, your fellow trustees, who are just looking for some financial advice. You know, we kind of feel the thing that's starting to slip away from us here, and before it goes completely south on us, can we sit down and try and organize our lives here before we get into real trouble? What percentage of those, George, versus people who come to the office going, please help, we've slipped below the water, we're in deep trouble?
It's tough to actually give a percentage, but we do have many cases that people will come to us and then it may be a year before they finally come to us again, or it may be 2 months or 3 months down the road. But we don't charge for that initial consultation. In fact, we don't charge for any consultations. The only time we charge or start to charge is when it's actually signed up and the creditors agree.
Right, okay.
So, but in many cases, we will deal with somebody and it can take, may only just take a week to do it, but on the other hand, it may take several weeks. Or in one case, I was talking with one of my colleagues, he'd been approached a year ago, and now they're coming back.
Oh, okay. So there was an initial overture, and then they kind of went away.
Yeah, we discussed the situation with them. We told them what the facts were and how to handle it, and they decided that for one reason or another that they wouldn't do it then, and finally the pressure probably got to them too much, and now they're back.
You know, there's a disturbing certainty of prediction. For example, we're just a few weeks away from next year, George, and already statistical manipulators are predicting with great confidence that a certain number of Canadians will go bankrupt in 2015, and they'll be happy to give you a number. I'm sure you've probably already seen the 2015 projections. Is that not a little discomforting? I mean, I suppose it's typical year after year. Large numbers of us do, but why are we so darn predictable, George?
Well, I think it's I don't know that it's. I mean. The number of people that go bankrupt or are insolvent, it's not bankruptcy, it's insolvent.
Right. Just go under, right?
Well, they make proposals, or they do debt settlements. There's about 11,000 a year in BC.
Okay.
And there's 2,500 on the island, and the rest of them, most of them are in the Fraser Valley, and it's the same pretty well every year. Now, whether there's going to be an increase next year, I don't necessarily think so. Mm-hmm. I think we'll be sharing the 11,000 that happen every year, and it's just a question of how many of them will come through and do proposals. Or I don't think people have talked about an interest rate increase.
Right. There's certainly a lot in the papers about that these days. Sometime next year, most everybody seems to agree, interest rates will start to go up.
Right, and I don't think it's going to affect business that much, at least initially. I think maybe 2 years down the road it might, largely because the credit card companies won't change their interest rates. And that's where most of the debt is.
Okay.
Lines of credit, yes, they could be affected by interest increases, the base rates. But by and large, most of the lines of credit are relatively small compared to the credit cards. And mortgages will only really start being affected as they roll over, or as people get new mortgages and maybe get rid of their variable mortgage and lock into a longer term.
Let me press you on that one, and we'll come back to proposals versus bankruptcy in a second. But as long as you've opened that door, let me just ask you point blank. If I'm sitting with a variable rate mortgage here in December of 2014 that's coming up for renewal, say sometime next year, and the whole financial world seems to be pretty united on the fact that interest rates are going to start going up sometime next year, what should I do with my variable rate mortgage that I'm sitting on today, George? Should I wait and play the angles and watch the numbers before they start to percolate? Or should I just roll it over into a 5-year fixed right now?
It's difficult to say. Each person has their own circumstances. My basic recommendation is that if you got around a 3% mortgage at the moment, variable rate, and I would be looking at locking it in.
Right.
Maybe not today,
right,
but certainly within the next 3 or 4 months, especially as more and more news comes forward of interest rates increases. You got to remember that on a $300,000 mortgage, a 1% increase is like $250 a month in just interest.
Sure. And a lot of people who are, it's not it's a pretty darn expensive housing market, especially here in Greater Vancouver, George, but the whole blinking province is pretty pricey. And a lot of particularly younger buyers have gotten into situations where they're pretty maxed out based on today's numbers. They can afford everything right now. But when those numbers start to tick up on the interest side, some of these younger buyers are going to be in some trouble.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why they may want to think about locking in if they got a variable rate mortgage, because otherwise, as I say, $300,000 mortgage, 1% is $250 a month.
Right. Let me ask you one other question, and then we'll get back to the trustee stuff. But on the mortgage thing, suppose now, this is boomer life, and a lot of us boomers have kids that we're trying to help get into the housing game as best we can if we think that's right for them and so on. So what about caveats to parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles who co-sign on some of these commitments by our children? What sort of what should we be thinking about before we sign on the dotted line or co-sign on the dotted line?
Well, I think you've got to be thinking about if that co-signature, if the youngster goes bankrupt, then you're liable on it.
Right.
Anybody that's in a boomer situation, 55 plus, I wouldn't be signing or co-signing anything for the kids that are coming through, because you could easily be wearing it, and then you end up having to do a proposal too.
Right.
Because that's, in fact, I know several files that we've had where we've had to actually deal with the co-signatures of either mortgages or foreclosures or car loans, where the elder person guaranteed it and now has to deal with it.
And, I mean, God bless us all for wanting to do right by our kids and for wanting to see our kids succeed. But sometimes we can overextend ourselves in that well-intentioned process, can't we?
Oh, I was talking to somebody yesterday where exactly that happened. The lady in question has a daughter who's 22, 23 years old, consistently wants to live in with her, and then she co-signs the telephone bill. The daughter ends up racking up a bill for $1,000, can't pay it, and she ends up having to pay it.
Right.
That sort of stuff happens all the time. I'm not saying that you shouldn't support your children, but some stage they've got to start learning to be on their own.
Right, and there are ways in which one can support one's children without making the commitment that might see you holding the bag, so to speak.
That's right.
So just be careful.
Yep, absolutely.
Bottom line, just be careful. It's not a wrong thing. You just got to do it the right way, right?
Well, the right way is cash.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't afford the cash, you can't afford to do it. That's my basic.
That's the oldest rule in the book, too, isn't it? Eh? But, here we are with these historic low interest rates and an instant gratification society. The temptations are pretty strong out there, George, especially at this time of year. My gosh, Christmas and all the ads and all the shopping and all the buzz. It's difficult not to get swept up in all that, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's a time for kids and kids' presents, and that credit card is available to, if you have any margin left in the credit cards, that's probably what you might spend it on. But then you have to account for it next year.
Right. Is this a time of year that typically some of us, even the more diligent, do weaken a little bit because of the pressures, if you will, of Christmas? It seems an odd word to use, but there are pressures, aren't there?
There's huge pressures. All the seasons, Easter, Halloween, Christmas, especially Christmas for the kids, is a very special time, and the kids have to get presents, and then of course they're competitive with kids next door, and their presents. So people don't want their kids to feel left out.
Mm-hmm.
So credit cards will do it.
Interesting stuff. Our guest is a specialist in debt settlement and debt restructuring. He is also the president of Abakhan and Associates, Trustees in Bankruptcy. A real pleasure to have George Abakhan with us on this episode of Boomer Life here on CISL 650, with lots more still to come right after this.
Canada's only weekly radio show dedicated to the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650.